Well, welcome back, neighborhood. Glad again you can continue engaging with Brandon and I's conversation. Brandon, I wanted to ask you about the protests. Obviously, our conversation has been inspired by the cultural moment we find ourselves in, the death of George Floyd. As I watch what's unfolding in our country, it seems there's a lot going on behind the protests. It's not as simple as the videos I'm watching on the news. Can you speak into maybe the complexity and what's behind the protests?
Yeah, I think the protests are much more than about the deaths of George Floyd. The tragic deaths of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, the injustices that are still continuing in this country are just a reminder for many of us about the injustice and other tragedies that have occurred in our country, the history of our country, from slavery, Civil War, segregation, Jim Crow, civil rights. It's a reminder of that, and the demonstration that we're seeing is a call for change, a need for change. And so I think the protests are just that. People are at the point demanding that change happens. And it's without question that change is needed. It's without question that it's in fact necessary for us to move forward and to ensure that our people, all people, but especially Black people and people of color, are treated as equal in this country. I think of the time of slavery, and at one point, slaves were considered three-fifths of a human. And oftentimes, these types of actions, the injustices that occur, the loss of life, the murders of individuals, and it reminds people that we are all still considered, in some instances, three-fifths of a human, or it feels that way. And of course, we never were, but that is the way in which our history has adopted it. And so how do we begin to acknowledge, again, the challenges that have plagued our countries, the injustices that have happened? And I think the demonstration is a manifestation of people's fear, people's anger, people's frustration, in the lost and unjust treatment of Black people and people of color. And so, it's an important time. The actions that are taking place is a call for all of us to be involved. It's a call for, doctors, lawyers, educators, religious leaders, students, parents, our entire community, our entire nation to band together to demonstrate that we can work together for change. It reminds me of Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, because I still believe in that dream that our kids, our people in our community will grow up and live in a nation where they're not judged or treated by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. That our nation will live out its true meaning of its creed, and that all men are created equal. And so it's so important for us to work together to make sure that happens, and to demand the change that we seek, and continue to fight for justice and equality in this country. And so I don't feel that the protests are just about the tragic death of George Floyd. It's about so much more. And it's about acknowledging and recognizing the history of our country and doing everything to make sure that we don't continue to marginalize or demonstrate unjust treatment to people. And so when we talked earlier about racism, we talked about prejudice and discrimination, antagonism, and an unjust treatment of people. And if these things continue to happen, then it is an example of that racism that we talked about. And so, it's so important to make sure that we continue to fight, and we fight together. And so, yeah, it's an important time in our country.
Again, thank you, Brandon, for the thoughtful response. Appreciate it. Appreciate kind of coming to an understanding of the depth behind some of the protests that we're seeing in our nation. Hey, thanks for joining us, neighborhood. We'll see you again tomorrow.